Receiving.
Receiving antennas, these weird things, and who uses them?
Maybe roosting if we get to it, we'll see what Bruce says. So we'll see.
Do you have a receiving antenna?
I thought about buying one.
Why?
Well, I'm plagued with noise right now.
Okay.
And I thought about buying a receiving loop. And the receiving loops are small, but they're very broad banded.
Okay.
I just bought a new discount. Takes me up to 3 gig.
So
I thought the loops were narrow.
yeah. So if you have a transmitting loop,
Unless you put a sense antenna in it, and then it makes cardioid.
so if you have a transmitting loop, it's gonna be very narrow banded.
Okay.
But the same size loop, they build it, and it's broad banded.
All right.
But we haven't got to that yet.
Why do we have receiving?
I don't know.
Because
Well, one of the things then will come up is for direction finding.
Yeah.
To find noise and interference.
and boy, do we have a lot in the area now.
And if you have a big club like PCARS, they have a interference group that does that. And when somebody reports it, they go out and get their antennas and try to find out, triangulate, do all that good stuff. And then report it to the power company or the FCC, and nobody does anything.
One of the easiest ways to find it is with an software to find it. They're not that expensive. Get them as little as 25 bucks. But you got to be careful about the gain, because if you take the gain up on the input, you'll get all sorts of noise on it and birdies everywhere.
Okay, so we're going to talk about a beverage antenna, which I've never actually seen. Some other specialized ones. Some of the stuff you use for radio direction finding.
I've got a 66 ARRL manual, and they have a beer can antenna in it. Back when they were steel and you could
Well,
solder.
no, this is not a beer can. This is a beverage.
Oh,
The guy's name is Beverage.
oh, okay.
And long wires. Okay. Why are long wire receiving antennas different than long wire transmitting antennas?
Now, the beverage is terminated, if I remember correctly.
I think you're right. But I was just why because long wires are different. I just wondered if it was special. Anyway, the beverage is a receiving only antenna. Kind of like the rhombic when it's terminating.
They're very directional.
One or more wavelengths long. No gain compared to a dipole, so I guess that means it's what, 2 dB above a isotropic or something like that. Basically, you use them for the directionality. But they're saying one of the reasons you can use it because it's low gain is that for 160 and 80, gain doesn't buy anything because of the noise. You care more about directionality than you do gain.
What type antenna rotator do you need for your beverage antenna?
You don't.
A hefty one. One to rotate the house, right?
Yeah.
Have it on the roof.
The farm.
So example here is they're feeding with 50 ohm coax into, I assume that represents a balun to match it to the 450. It's 20 meters long, 1.8 meters above their ground. And they've done radials and copper wire on the ground and connected them together and all that good stuff. Plus it's got a terminating resistor. Boy, 4 counterpoises at both sides, 3 meters long. And it's stationary. Wouldn't be too good for finding noise sources, would it?
No, and it would be directly off the perpendicular to the main axis for your major reception.
You get 6 of them, and you just tap them. to see which one.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's a thought.
I'm not sure whose yard it's gonna go in.
Well, I think the Maxwell Museum, they had one on two towers they could spin around.
So when we construct a beverage, what factors do we need to include for good performance at the desired frequency?
Delta.
Right. We care about the length. What's generally true for low band 160 and 80 meter receiving antennas in general?
Alpha.
Right. Noise is even high on my vertical at 80 and 160. A pennant antenna. I think sometimes they call it a flag. It's weird because it's kind of backwards. Seems to me, but it's vertically polarized. It's a triangular loop that's terminated. So once again, it's a receiving antenna. It wouldn't transmit well. It's a lot smaller than a beverage, and you can rotate it depending on what band. Yeah. And there's two examples, a square one and a pennant one. They appear to be the same. I mean, lengthwise and everything, impedance wise. So I don't know what the advantage is of making it pennant shaped versus a flag, but they work basically the same.
I have not seen one of those before.
And being 34 feet long, I guess theoretical it's rotatable, but not easily. But if you did it at a higher band, if you did one at 2 meters, you could certainly rotate it. So what is a pennant antenna?
I see 900 ohms.
Yep, 900 is a key.
Baker.
I wonder if it was actually invented by George Pennant. I didn't look that up. All right. The other thing on receiving antennas is the receiving directivity factor. I used to think RDF was meant something else, but in this case, it's a receiving directivity factor. And it's the ratio of forward gain to average gain. So they take the gain around the hemisphere of the antenna compared to the forward gain, and it gives you the directivity factor. They claim a pennant is about 7.5 dB, and the beverage is about 8.6. I think the question on the pennant is question on the test. I found this chart showing all these directivity factors for different antennas and variations of them, going up all the way up to 16 dB for 3 broad-sided 800 to 900 foot beverages with a lot of verticals. It takes 5 to 20 acres, so I'm not going to be doing one of those.
Not good in an HO.
So what is receiving directivity factor? Delta.
Delta.
Right.
Direction finding antennas. It's fun and useful. I guess it's fun. I haven't done one. It's useful if you're trying to find a interfering source or a bad noise source, like a transformer or something that's really putting out a lot of noise. Normally they'll use some kind of loop.
I just thought when we did our simulated emergency test,
Yeah.
there was someone who's being obnoxious, harmful, destructive interference or whatever.
Was it you?
It wasn't me because I was a big chicken dinner.
I know.
So it wasn't me. And we just started talking, we're gonna be here an hour and a half, you're only gonna have one transmission, so you guys, if you wanna go look for this clown, go ahead.
I didn't hear him, other than Bob, doing pseudo.
He was there for maybe about 4 or 5 minutes. But after he started talking, realizing that people are gonna have time to look for him. He went
Huh.
away.
Okay. They use a variety, usually some kind of loop. Um, the main drawback of a normal loop is it's got a bidirectional pattern, so it's kind of hard to triangulate. They also have a kind of a low output. You can use a multi-turn loop like they used to do in old-time radios, where you'd have this spiral loop in the back, which was fairly broadband and directional.
I ran a radio directional finder on our boat when I was a kid. It's the first thing my dad taught me to use. And I was supposed to navigate for the onshore radio sources. And so, yeah, you use a loop and a vertical whip.
Yeah, sense antenna.
If you, easy one. If you have a strong noise source, just a mag mount on a baking sheet. Okay, you rotate the antenna this way and that way to know how the polarization of the source. And then you can point the antenna, until you get a decent null. And then you flip around, see if you get a better null. And it's cheap and easy to do. You can get a good job that way.
The old Zenith Transoceanics used to do that. The modern radios, the Grundig or Eton, a satellite 750, satellite 800, they have a radio directional finder antenna system.
Oh.
All right, so what's the main drawback of a small wire loop antenna for direction finding?
Bidirectional
Pattern. How can the output voltage of a multi-turn receiving loop antenna be increased?
Delta.
More turns or a larger diameter loop, or both? One of the ways to improve it is to put a electrostatic shield around the loop. That one kind of always confused me how that made it work, but it does eliminate the unbalanced capacitance coupling. So apparently it's effective. I know that if you've ever seen them do the metal detectors, with the loop on the bottom, and they're always in a shield, multi-turns in there with a shield like that, which I guess helps make it a little more directional and improves the null. So what's an advantage of placing a grounded electrostatic shield around a small loop of direction finding antenna?
We'll say,
Baker.
E3
Get rid of the capacitance.
for Billy.
Sometimes they add what they call a sense antenna, which is a little vertical, stationed kind of out in front, I guess, or behind, whichever way you want to look at it. And it allows you to modify the pattern so that you only have a null in one direction, and it really creates a cardioid type pattern. So on the side where the sense antenna is, you get a very strong null. And it's kind of broadband otherwise, so you really hunt for, I guess you use it from nulling as opposed to finding the strongest signal.
Alpha.
Okay. You can also do the antenna array that we talked about earlier. And if you phase it right, you can get the cardioid pattern. And see, that was the one that was what, half wavelength apart and fed at 90 degrees. I remember that one. Or quarter wavelength apart, and it still works, right? It says you can also make a array with two dipoles fed in quadrature.
Or like a fox on ant.
I guess that would give you a cardioid pattern. I assume they're talking horizontal dipoles.
Sometimes verticals. Been that way. Ones I've seen.
Yeah, I don't know about that one. That's not an exam question, though. So the cardioid gives you a very sharp null is the main point. Okay. So what feature of a cardioid pattern makes it useful for direction finding?
Baker.
They say that you a lot of times need to add an attenuator, depending on the strength of the signal, because it might be overloading your receiver. So you're getting bad information. Because as you overload it, you don't see the sharpness of the null or the maximum signal, either one. So why is RF attenuation used when direction finding? Okay, if you're direction finding and you got multiple people, you can do triangulation. Where you go out and you report to one another what your angle is for the signal and plot it on a map and figure out exactly where it is or very close. It's a little harder to do when you're doing it with one person. You have to move around, I guess, and drive, and now you're there. And so what is the triangulation method of direction finding?
Charlie?
Charlie sounds good. You couldn't do it from a fixed station,
Well, multiple fixed stations.
but didn't say multiple.
Yeah, well.
It said A.
But you-
A fixed station.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I just saw three headings to a single source.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If you had three fixed stations, it'd be great.
yeah.
All right.